12 years. That's how long Thorn Shepherd had gone without seeing another soul, without wanting to. He'd built his cabin so deep into the canyon walls that even the hawks seemed to hesitate before flying overhead. Solitude wasn't a punishment, it was a shield. Every plank of wood, every hidden path, every rusted nail hammered into the stone was part of the fortress he'd raised between himself and the world that betrayed him. But all that came crashing down with a knock, a weak one. Thorn froze coffee halfway to his lips. The sun was just beginning to burn away the morning mist, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The knock came again, softer, slower, like someone was fading dying right there on his doorstep. No one should be here. No one knew this place existed. He reached for the rifle above his fireplace, heart pounding not from fear, but from something worse contact. He crept to the window and peered through the cracked glass. At first, he saw nothing. Then, dark hair, torn fabric, a slumped figure barely holding upright against his doorframe. He should have ignored it. Let whatever was outside pass like everything else in life had. That's what the old Thorn would have done, the one who learned the cost of caring. But the silence between the knocks wasn't emptiness. It was plea. He opened the door. She collapsed into him. A young Apache woman, her long black hair sticky with dried blood, her buckskin dress ripped and soaked through. She weighed nearly nothing in his arms, but her presence hit him like a thunderclap. Even unconscious, there was something in her jaw, her face, a fierceness that sparked something inside him, long buried. He should have dragged her back out and closed the door. Harboring a wounded Apache woman in these parts was as good as signing a death sentence. But instead, he carried her inside, placed her gently on his rough woolen blankets, and stood over her like she was a ghost conjured from memory. She was beautiful. But not in the delicate way of a saloon girl or preacher's daughter. Hers was a wild, weather-worn beauty, sharp and enduring. He stared at the blood soaking through her ribs and reminded himself she wasn't his to care for. But his hands moved anyway, heating water, ripping cloth, pouring whiskey on a blade. When her eyes opened, they weren't filled with fear. They were bottomless black as coal and just as capable of burning. She didn't scream or flinch. She studied him. "You are not what I expected to find," she whispered. Her voice was rough, tinged with the musical undertones of her native tongue. He blinked. "Neither are you." She offered a faint, painful smile. "I am Ayana, and you are the ghost man the elders speak of, the one who vanished into the cliffs and never returned." His blood turned to ice. She knew. They knew. His sanctuary wasn't secret anymore, but her next words shattered his fear with something colder recognition. "They say you lost someone. That grief turned you into a shadow." He didn't speak, couldn't. Her voice softened. "I know that pain." His fingers trembled, not from the chill, from the way her presence peeled away every defense he'd spent years building. Then, as he cleaned her wound, she clutched his wrist stronger than he expected. Her eyes locked on his. "Before you choose to help me know this, if you do, they will come, and they will not ask questions." A chill settled over him deeper than winter. She wasn't lying. "I already hear them," she murmured. "White men, soldiers or worse. They burned our camp, killed the children. I was gathering herbs by the river. I wasn't supposed to survive." He paused. "They're hunting you." She nodded. "They want my father, Chief Nalnish. When they couldn't find him, they came for the rest of us." Thorn had heard the name, a strategist, a fighter, a thorn in the government's side. Ayana looked up, her voice steady despite the pain. "I am his daughter." The implications hit him like a gunshot. Helping her wasn't just dangerous, it was war. "You fear them," she said. "That's why you live here like a ghost." Her words struck a nerve. She didn't say it to wound him. She said it like she understood. "I fear what I become when I stop hiding," he admitted, surprising himself. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Ayanna sat up with effort, pain etched into her face. "They found my trail." Without another word, Thorn moved. He helped her up, half carrying her toward the fireplace. Behind it, a hidden panel, a root cellar. "You can fit in there if you stay quiet." "You would risk yourself for me?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he helped her in heart-pounding. As he shut the panel, their faces brushed for a heartbeat. She looked at him not like a stranger, but like someone who saw the truth behind the scars. Why, she asked. He thought for a long moment. "Maybe I'm tired of being a ghost." Then came the knock on the door, a harsh voice. "Open up. Territorial business." He turned toward the door rifle above the mantle, blood still on his hands and a lie forming on his tongue. 12 years of silence had ended, and what happened next would decide if either of them lived to see sunset. The pounding at the door came again louder, more forceful. Territorial business. "Open up." Thorn Shepherd didn't move at first. His hand rested on the latch, but his mind was racing, calculating, gauging the distance from the fireplace to the rifle above the mantel, noting the bloody cloths still soaking in the basin, the faint trail of blood leading from the door to where Ayanna now lay hidden behind stone. He exhaled once, slow and deliberate, then yanked the door open. 3 men stood outside, framed by the morning light. Their boots were caked with trail dust, their eyes sharp and mean. Guns hung low on their hips, not for show. The man in front wore a dented badge that gleamed like tarnished brass. "Morning," Thorn said flatly, planting himself in the doorway. "You boys lost," the leader sneered. "Deputy Marshal Clayton Briggs. We're tracking an Apache fugitive. Trail led straight to your porch." Thorn glanced down. Blood. Damn it. He hadn't seen it drip onto the wooden planks. The second man, broad-chested and pig-eyed, stepped forward, sniffing the air like a predator. "You've been butchering." Thorn didn't blink. "Shot a deer yesterday. Kicked me good while I dressed it. You want a cut?" Briggs didn't laugh. His eyes scanned the cabin behind Thorn, sharp as broken glass. "We'll have a look inside." Every instinct screamed to slam the door, but that would only confirm suspicion. Thorn stepped aside with a grunt. "Make it quick. I don't get paid by the hour." The men entered, boots thudding on the wooden floor. The cabin was small, cluttered, but well-ordered. Every inch of it had once been a sanctuary, but now it felt exposed, invaded. Pig Eyes moved first, poking at the table where the bloodied cloths soaked. "Looks like more than a hoof scratch." Thorn rolled up his sleeve, revealing an old scar on his forearm. "Open the damn thing back up." Happens. The third man, quiet, wiry, and watchful, drifted toward the fireplace. He knelt, ran a finger along the hearthstone, then held it up. Blood. Thorn's gut tightened. "This trail," the man said. Something was dragged. Briggs narrowed his eyes. "You sure it was a deer?" Thorn forced a shrug. "Unless the deer was wearing a buckskin dress, I think I'm safe." The lie was bold, dangerous, but it gave him a moment's edge. He watched Briggs carefully. The man didn't blink. Then came the sentence that tightened every muscle in Thorn's body. "Funny thing about Apache blood," Briggs said casually. "Worth $50 if it's still warm." Thorn's voice dropped. "That what a life's worth to you?" Briggs's smile turned cruel. Apache ain't people. They're threats, and anyone harboring them threats too. He nodded at the men. Search everything. Thorne stepped between them and the fireplace, voice low but sharp. You boys better tread real careful. Pig Eyes drew his pistol part way. That a threat, Hermit? That's a warning. The tension in the room snapped tight. Years of silence melted off Thorne like morning frost. The ghost captain, the man who'd hunted corrupt officers through 3 states, was surfacing. He looked calm, dead calm, the kind of stillness that meant danger. You ever hear of Captain Thorne Shepard? He asked softly. Briggs frowned. What? 5th Cavalry, Thorne said. 12 years ago. Ghost Captain, they called me. I didn't vanish. I came up here to bury the man I used to be. Pig Eyes laughed uncertain. That a bedtime story. Check the records next time you're in Santa Fe, Thorne said, voice like gravel. See how many traitors went missing. The third man, quiet and wiry, froze mid-step. Recognition dawning. Holy hell, he muttered. You're him. Thorne didn't deny it. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. Briggs recovered quickly. Don't matter who you were. You harbor that Apache girl and you're just another corpse with a story. He motioned toward the fireplace. The third man moved closer, fingers running along the stones, searching for a hidden latch. From behind the panel, a soft intake of breath escaped. Ayanna. Too quiet for normal ears, but not for hunters. There's something behind here. Pig Eyes growled, shoving Thorne aside. The hidden panel clicked. Thorne knew time had run out. He moved. Like thunder, cracking open the sky, Thorne reached for the knife at his hip. Briggs drew his pistol, but he was a second too late. Steel flashed. Briggs went down with a wet gurgle, eyes wide, blood spilling across the floor. Pig Eyes lunged for his gun. Thorne was already turning. A punch to the throat. Collapse. The third man fired. The shot tore through the cabin wall but missed. Thorne tackled him before he could fire again. One clean strike, a crunch of bone and silence. 3 bodies, 1 heartbeat. Ayanna emerged slowly from the wall, leaning on the frame. She stared at the carnage without flinching. So the stories were true, she whispered. The ghost who kills without a sound. Thorne wiped his blade on a torn jacket. I didn't want this life anymore, he said, but sometimes it comes looking. She limped toward him. They'll send more. I know. We can't stay here. Thorne nodded already, seeing the maps in his mind, deeper trails, old Apache caves beyond the river. We'll vanish, he said, together. She looked at him. You don't have to do this. I already did. He helped her gather what little they could carry. As they stepped out into the canyon light, Thorne looked back at the place he'd called home for 12 years. Blood on the floor, smoke in the air. A hermit no longer. A warrior reborn. A legend returned. The cabin floor was slick with blood. 3 men. 3 guns. 3 lives snuffed out in less than 30 seconds. Thorne Shepard stood among the bodies like a storm just past, chest heaving in slow, deliberate breaths. His blade dripped crimson. The fire crackled behind him, casting flickering shadows on the walls, shadows of a man he thought he'd buried years ago. Ayanna emerged from the hidden compartment behind the fireplace. She stepped lightly, favoring her wounded side, her hand braced against the stone wall. Her face, once pale with blood loss, now bore a different kind of stillness. Not shock, not fear, recognition. So the stories were true, she said softly. You were death in a uniform. Thorne said nothing. He couldn't. Words felt foreign now, as if speaking them might bring the weight of what he'd done crashing down on him all at once. He looked at his hands, stained trembling slightly from the aftershock of adrenaline. The same hands that once held a wedding ring, now slick with the blood of men who'd made the mistake of crossing his threshold. Ayanna stepped closer, her voice gentle but unwavering. You didn't kill them because you hate them. You killed them because you knew what they were. He met her gaze. Her eyes held no judgment, only the solemn understanding of someone who had seen too much death in too few years. I warned them, Thorn finally said, his voice low and raw. I told them I didn't want to be that man again. But he never left you, she whispered. He was waiting. Thorn turned his back to the carnage and crossed to the window. Outside, the canyon was quiet again, but it no longer felt like sanctuary. It felt like a coffin with the lid open, ready to bury him if he stayed one more hour. They'll send more, Ayanna said. Territorial men don't take silence as an answer. When those three don't report back, I know Thorn cut in. She stepped beside him. So what happens now? Thorn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the fireplace and pulled a hidden compartment from behind a loose brick. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in oilskin, his old cavalry papers, a tarnished captain's badge, and a photograph worn from years of being unfolded and refolded. A woman, a child, the ghosts he'd come here to forget. He stared at the image, fingers trembling. I thought if I hid long enough the killing would stay buried with them. Ayanna looked at the photograph, then at him. But it didn't. He shook his head slowly. No, because this world keeps pulling men like me back into the fire. I didn't kill those bounty hunters for you, not entirely. I killed them because I knew what they would do. I've seen it too many times, and I couldn't let it happen again. She placed her hand gently on his arm. Then maybe you're not just the ghost anymore. Maybe you're the reckoning. He looked down at her hand. Small, warm, strong, the hand of someone who knew pain, who had bled and survived it. Then he looked around the cabin, his fortress of solitude turned battlefield. The bed still stained with her blood, the table knocked over, the basin of water tinged red, the smell of gunpowder still lingering in the air like a bitter memory. I can't stay here, he muttered. No, she said, and I can't go back. They stood in silence for a moment, two exiles from different worlds, both hunted, both scarred. Then Thorn spoke again. There's a series of caves upriver, old Apache burial grounds sacred and forgotten. I scouted them once during the war. Even the most skilled trackers won't find us there. Ayanna nodded. Then we go together. He didn't ask if she was sure. She didn't ask if he was ready. They just moved. Together, they stripped the cabin of anything useful. Rifles, ammunition, salted meat water skins, flint maps, and a half-burned journal Thorn had kept for years without writing a single word in. Then, before leaving, Thorn did something he never thought he would. He walked to the center of the cabin, poured kerosene along the floor, and lit a match. The flames rose fast. He didn't flinch, neither did Ayanna. Outside, as the roof caved in and the smoke began to rise into the narrow canyon sky, she watched him silently. "You're burning your past," she said. "No," Thorn replied. "I'm making sure no one else ever dies in it." The two of them rode out as the fire consumed the last 12 years of Thorn's self-imposed exile. They didn't speak much as they traveled only when necessary. But a rhythm formed between them, a silent bond built on survival trust, and a strange kind of comfort that neither of them understood, but both accepted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the pine ridges, Thorn finally broke the silence. You never asked why I left the cavalry." Ayana glanced sideways but didn't press. "They sent us into a village," he said. "Said it was a raider outpost. Told us to clear it." His jaw clenched. There were no warriors, just women, children. I refused the order, so they stripped my rank, labeled me a deserter, but I came back anyway. She said nothing. "I came back," he repeated, voice cracking, "but not to the army. I came back for justice." Ayana's voice was a whisper, and now Thorn looked ahead toward the darkening trail. "Now, I don't know what I am, but I know I'm done running." She reached across the saddle and took his hand. No words, just warmth. And for the first time in 12 years, Thorn Shepherd, once a ghost, once a captain, felt something he never thought he'd feel again. Alive. The fire roared behind them, devouring everything. Thorn didn't look back. Ayana did once. The flames had taken root quickly, dancing up the cabin's beams like spirits released from prison. It wasn't just wood and cloth and blood burning in that blaze. It was 12 years of silence, guilt, and the fragile illusion that isolation could keep the past buried. "Everything you had," Ayana murmured, the glow reflecting in her dark eyes. "It's gone." "No, Thorn," said his voice, rough but steady. "Everything that kept me from living is gone." They turned away, stepping into the shadowed pass that led deeper into the mountains, beyond roads, beyond law, beyond reach. They moved slowly at first. Her wounds still ached. His mind still reeled. But the further they walked, the more it felt like something was shedding off them with each step, like old skin cracking in the cold air. Around them, the canyon swallowed the last traces of smoke. Silence returned. But this silence was different than the one Thorn had once lived in. This silence wasn't empty. It was shared. By nightfall, they had made camp in the foothills beneath a limestone overhang that caught the wind and howled like lost souls in the distance. Thorn built a fire with practiced hands, but his every motion was slower, more deliberate, like he was learning how to exist around another person again. Ayana sat cross-legged on the opposite side of the fire, her hair falling across her bruised cheek, her eyes reflecting the flames but never leaving his face. "I used to think survival meant being alone," she said suddenly. "That solitude was a shield." He looked up. "It is, but it's also a prison." She drew a line in the dirt with a twig. "When my mother died, I left our village. I wanted to be a healer like her, but the elders said it was no longer safe to learn the old ways. The white men were watching. So I studied in silence and hiding behind rocks and riverbeds, always alone. You survived." "Barely," she replied, "until I found someone else who was barely surviving." Their eyes locked, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet. Something older, deeper, recognition. He leaned back against the stone. "I've spent 12 years trying to forget the sound of gunfire, the feel of blood, the look in a man's eyes when he realizes I'm not going to miss." She was quiet. "I told myself I'd only ever kill again if someone gave me no choice." "You didn't hesitate," she said. "No, and that's what scares me most." The wind sighed through the canyon. Ayana stood and walked over, sitting beside him, close enough to share warmth, not close enough to touch. She stared into the fire. "I've seen men kill, brutally, needlessly. I've seen boys forced to fight before they understood what death was. But you kill like someone who wishes he didn't know how." He looked at her, stunned by the precision of her words. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. "You're Thorn," she said simply, "and I'm Ayana. That's enough for now. They spent the next 3 days moving deeper into the mountains, navigating hidden paths only the Apache remembered. Ayana guided him through the terrain like it was part of her blood. They crossed icy streams, climbed narrow ridges, slept in crevices where even the moonlight couldn't reach, and with every mile something in Thorn softened. She caught him smiling once, just a flicker, as she tricked a rabbit into a snare using pine sap and stone. He caught her humming an old tune under her breath while boiling water for tea. These moments weren't big, but they were real. The kind of moments ghosts don't get to have. On the fourth morning, they reached a place so hidden that even the birds seemed reluctant to fly overhead. An old Apache cave hidden by thorns and brush carved into the side of a cliff. Inside, the air was cool and damp, but not lifeless. There were markings on the wall, ancient symbols painted in ochre and coal. Ayana traced them gently with her fingers. "My people call this a place of breathing," she said, "a place where warriors came not to die but to find out if they still belong to life." Thorn said nothing, but he understood. This was no longer just a hideout. It was a reckoning. He sat at the edge of the cave entrance that evening, watching the horizon bleed orange and gold. Ayana sat beside him, her wounds healing, her posture no longer guarded. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "What? Helping me?" He looked at her. "Every man I've ever helped ended up dead or worse. But you, no, I don't regret this. Even if it means you can't go back to your life, there was nothing to go back to." She nodded. "Same." They fell silent again, but it was the kind of silence that felt like a seed waiting to bloom. That night, as they lay beneath layers of furs in the cave's warmth, Ayana turned toward him in the darkness. "Your ghosts don't scare me," she said. He exhaled slowly. "Mine do. You think they define you?" "Don't they?" "No," she said firmly. "What you chose defines you." She touched his hand in the dark. Just once. He didn't pull away. The days blurred into weeks. They hunted, foraged, mapped escape routes, but they also shared stories quietly in bits and pieces. He told her about the men he'd killed, the woman he lost, the son he never got to bury. She told him about the ceremonies her people no longer held, the legends no one dared to sing, the friends who vanished under the boots of soldiers. And yet somehow, amid all that grief, they laughed. They laughed. It was a miracle. On a quiet afternoon, Thorn stood outside the cave watching a hawk circle high above. Ayana joined him, carrying a carved wooden bowl of fresh berries. "You think we can live like this?" she asked. He took a berry, bit into it, and let the juice stain his tongue before answering. "I think we already are." She smiled. He smiled back. They were no longer just survivors. They were something else now, not quite healed, not yet whole, but no longer ghosts. Together, they were writing something new, etched not in stone or legend or blood, but in the quiet moments that people forget to count. And maybe, just maybe that was enough. The wind had shifted. Up in the high cliffs where birds rarely circled and even wolves stayed silent, Thorn felt it something changing, pulling at the corners of his mind like distant thunder rolling toward a dry canyon. He'd lived in shadows for so long, he forgot what it meant to feel the sun warm his skin. But here, among the stone carvings and echoes of Ayana's people, he began to understand something he had buried deep for far too long. He hadn't been hiding to survive. He'd been hiding because he believed he no longer deserved to live. Ayana moved like a ghost among the brush, foraging roots, herbs, and wild garlic while keeping her ear to the earth. Every so often, she'd pause, close her eyes, and whisper to the ground, as if it might whisper back. She knew what it meant to lose everything, but, unlike Thorn, she hadn't let the loss consume her. She'd carried it. Now she carried him too without ever saying so. Thorn watched her stir medicine into a bowl of heated water one afternoon and finally broke the silence. "I used to believe helping others would destroy me," he said, not looking at her. "And maybe it did. 12 years ago, I tried to do the right thing. I tried to save people who didn't want saving, and in the end, I lost everything." Ayanna glanced up. Her eyes were steady, and now he exhaled eyes on the horizon. "Now I realized that losing everything saved what little was left of me." Ayanna set the bowl down. "When I knocked on your door, you had every reason to turn me away. I almost did, but you didn't. I don't know why." "You do," she said softly. "You just don't want to say it." He met her gaze. "Because saving you felt like saving a part of me I thought was dead." There it was, the truth. She didn't speak, just moved closer, laid her hand over his. The touch was feather light, but it grounded him more than any wall or weapon ever had. The next day they saw the first sign. Smoke, far in the distance. Not from wildfire, but a controlled burn. Signaling. A tactic Thorn knew too well. Someone was searching using smoke to flush people out from hiding. Military or bounty men either way, it meant danger. Ayanna read the tension in his shoulders. They're close. He nodded. Not close enough to run yet, but close enough to decide who we are when they arrive. That night, Thorn sat alone on a ridge above the cave, rifle across his knees, moonlight touching the iron barrel. Ayanna joined him after sunset, wrapped in her mother's old shawl, her footsteps light as always. "Tell me the truth," she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. "I'm scared," he said. "Not of dying. I've made peace with that. I'm scared of what happens if I survive, if I have to go on being whatever this is." "You're not a killer," she said. "I've killed men. You're not a ghost. I've lived like one." She sat beside him. "You are not what you've done, Thorn. You are what you choose next." And the next choice came sooner than either expected. Before dawn, a lone rider appeared scouting. Not careless, not loud, smart, professional, which meant more were coming. Thorn tracked him in silence, then returned to the cave. "They've got trackers, the kind who don't ask questions." Ayanna didn't panic. She simply packed. As they prepared to move again, Thorn caught her watching him. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He paused. "Regret what? Saving me?" He looked her straight in the eye. "No. Saving you saved me." They didn't head east. They went north into lands marked on no-map ridges that only Ayanna's tribe remembered, where the cliffs were too steep and the canyons too narrow for even soldiers to follow. They didn't talk much on the trail. They didn't need to. But one night, as they sat beside a crackling fire of cedar branches, Ayanna leaned into his side and whispered, "Do you think people like us ever get peace?" Thorn looked up at the stars, then down at the hand that had once ended lives and now cradled hers. "Peace isn't something you find," he said. "It's something you choose to build, even when everything in you says to burn it down." Days passed. No more smoke, no more riders. But neither of them believed they were safe. That didn't stop them from living. They rebuilt the cave carefully, smoothed the stones, wove vines for cover. They gathered water from high mountain runoff and carved notches in the stone wall to track the days. Time moved differently in that hidden place. It didn't heal them. It didn't erase what they'd done. But it gave them space to remember that they were still human. Still capable of building instead of destroying. Still capable of love. One evening, as twilight wrapped around the mountains and the wind smelled of pine and snow, Ayana stood beside Thorn at the cave entrance. She pointed to the sky. My people say that when the hawks return to the same wind each spring, it means their spirits have chosen to forgive the land that broke them. Thorn watched the hawks soar. And what if the land never forgives us? Ayana's eyes glowed in the dusk. Then we forgive each other. And he did. In the silence of a place untouched by war beneath stars that had watched generations rise and fall, Thorn forgave the man he once was. He forgave the silence, the rage, the fear. Not because it was easy, but because she was beside him. Helping her hadn't just risked his safety. It had brought him back to life. In Ayana's presence, he found proof that courage wasn't about facing a bullet. It was about choosing vulnerability, compassion, love, even in the ashes of a broken world, especially there. And so, two broken people stood in the mouth of a cave staring into a horizon full of unknown dangers. But they were no longer ghosts. They were firelight and footfalls. They were hope written in scars. And whatever came next, they would face it together.